Hello there. Good afternoon to all of the Follow the Camino fans out there. My name is Kieran. I'm the host of the Camino Talks podcast, and I'm here today to chat with a very special guest, a pilgrim who recently completed her own journey on the Camino to Santiago in pretty trying circumstances. Wendy Dutwin. Wendy, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's so nice to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
And we're delighted to have you here too. So for a bit of context for everybody listening, Wendy journeyed on the Camino Portuguese in a couple of weeks ago. And this was around the time that there were some pretty severe weather issues taking place all along that stretch of the north of Portugal. And it was a not a dangerous situation, but a situation that required sort of a professional outfits to help with the situation and to ensure that everybody got to where they were going safe and sound. So Wendy, first of all, how was the overall Camino experience? Have you ever been on a journey like that, especially with some of the weather issues that affected you along the way?
Well, definitely not. I've actually done 2 Caminos now. And Follow the Camino was instrumental in both of them in structuring, sort of creating an infrastructure for me to complete both. The first one was 2 weeks and about 200 miles. It was the Primitivo, and it was from Oviedo, Spain to Santiago. And I had done that in 2022, and that one had been personal for me. And I hadn't planned on doing another Camino. I was sort of done. That was a wonderful spiritual experience for me. But this one was sort of under very unique circumstances, and it was double the time. It was about a month of walking, and it was double the distance, nearly 400 miles. And the weather, as you described, was biblical. It was fires, and it was rains, and it was, almost more than rains. It was like torrential, almost hurricane type weather, especially the last day that we marched into Santiago. And so it felt, metaphorically speaking, it felt very aligned with the kind of journey that I was taking on this particular one.
Okay, so then despite all of that, you made it into Santiago, you completed your journey, and probably all the better for it and all the more relieved you made it there.
Absolutely. And again, just to give a shout out to Follow the Camino, a lot of that infrastructure that was in place really helped me complete it. I'm not someone who, especially on this one, because I was doing it for such a specific reason, I wanted my focus to stay on that and not worrying about, is it safe to walk today? Is it not safe to walk today? And having people like Jade, who every morning would just sort of check in with me, or have one of the, emergency texts check in with me. Wendy, don't walk today. Just wait where you are. We're going to figure out how to move you to the next location, and we'll worry about adding on the mileage later on so that you can, complete it in the way you want to complete it. Just being able to be flexible like that, really, I was so relieved to not have to think about that kind of stuff, not to have to think where I was going to stay that night, not to have to worry. I met some lovely pilgrims along the way, and a lot of them were worried about finding accommodation and all that kind of stuff. I was so relieved to have that all handled by Jade and everyone, because they knew why I was doing this particular Camino, and they wanted to make sure that the last thing I was worrying about was A, whether it was safe to walk that day due to the weather, and B, whether I was going to have accommodation, when I arrived at wherever it was I was going. Obviously walking in weather, that was, torrential downpour, that's my decision and that's up to me. And I'm glad that I did that. But things like fires, you want to make sure that you're not only keeping yourself safe, but, there's all these firemen that were fighting these fires for these, Portuguese residents. And you don't want to be creating more chaos in something like that,
A burden that's already very strenuous and is difficult for locals who have to face the aftermath of the fire once you're done with your trip.
100%. There was one emergency technician at Follow the Camino, and I loved what she said to me at one point. She said, I know you see other pilgrims that are deciding to walk. And she said to me, you're a grown up. I'm not here to sort of treat you like a child, but I am here to advise you based on the circumstances that we're getting from speaking with, the embassy in Portugal and all of this other stuff. And she said, and, I know that you're very spiritually minded in terms of walking this. And it seems counterintuitive to do something in the vein of a spiritual journey that might be detracting and pulling resources away from other residents who need that help, So if I'm sort of socked in the forest and need help from firemen to get me out, it seems sort of counterintuitive to the whole purpose of why I was doing something like the Camino in the first place. And I really valued that kind of insight. It was something I intuitively was feeling anyway, but to just have it articulated like that by one of your guides was really helpful for me.
Well, look, ultimately what we're about is making sure that our clients have the best experience possible.
Sure.
At its most basic level, that comes to ensuring that people aren't in any danger when they're walking. But it's also about, you mentioned going on this journey for a very particular reason.
Sure.
It was never an option for you to say, well, look, I tried it this time. Just get me on the first plane out of here and I'll come back.
Correct.
I'll come back some other time. You needed to make this journey. There are other people who would have needed to make the journey for similar reasons or for other equally important reasons. And we are there to help people complete their journey in the way that they want to, in a way that they're comfortable with, and in a way that they can truly have taken something amazing out of.
That's such a really good point. And I think articulating from the beginning why I was doing this to Jade, for example, she was going to do everything in her power to make sure that I was able to complete this in the time frame that I wanted to complete it. My friend had died, and as someone that I loved dearly and that I was uniquely close to, and our relationship was so special and ours and unique. And his loss was so sudden and so tragic that it really kicked the wind out of my soul. And I recognized in my process of grieving, and this is not to, put anyone down in any way. I think, how do I want to say this? I think our society has I think we've inherited a lot of ideas about grief as a culture. And I think a lot of those ideas are inherited from unhealthy survival mechanisms. And I think that it can be really easy and tempting to delete the pain and to try to override it with this sort of well-meaning complacency, and so at the time I was hearing a lot of, really coming from a place of love, but well-meaning, move on, get over it, don't let it consume you. A lot of that kind of stuff. And
okay, so that's what by complacency you mean. This is a sad thing that's happened, but the only track is forward, and don't look back and don't stop and just keep going.
Correct. And what I think the Camino really ended up doing for me was it allowed me, because here's the thing, I know that grief is universal in the DNA of humanity, right? It just is. At some point, we're all going to be a part of that unfortunate club. This was my first experience with it. I had sort of skirted the death card up until now. And, so its expression was uniquely mine. While it's universal to us as a human race, my expression of it was unique. And it was this voice of not only what was gone in the loss of JJ, but also in all the dreams that I had for him, the dreams that I had for our relationship, the things that were not going to be spoken or said going forward, and I needed to express that. And, believe me, I get it. I've tried to sort of bury that sort of thing, and it seems a lot easier to try to pack it deep into the psyche of one's soul and shut the door on it, but, and the world wants to keep spinning when you suffer a loss. The world does keep spinning when anyone suffers a loss, and that's just the reality of things. But my world had stopped, and my world was on fire. And so, it sort of felt like when everyone was kind of telling me in their gentle, loving way to cool down, my body was telling me that it was going to consume me no matter what. And so physically, walking has always been the thing that has healed me. You know, just sort of the physical manifestation of healing has always manifested itself for me through the action of walking. Mm-hmm. And you know, I always have friends who sort of joke with me, like, you know, do you want to walk? Sure, let's walk. It's not that far. And for me, it's like, it'll be a 5-mile walk, and they'll be like, okay, this is far. This is not a short walk. I'll say, oh, it's not that far. Let's walk. You know, and they're like, what are you doing? You know,
Everyone's got that friend who just wants to walk, and the distance is less important than the walking.
It's true. And I have this one friend in Paris, and thank goodness she loves to walk too. So we're always like, walk, let's do it. Let's walk, you know, but we don't have a lot of friends around us who are, you know, as, you know, prone to that. So for me, a 400-mile walk over a month was not that it wasn't difficult. It was very difficult, especially with some of the weather things that we were just discussing. But it was so worth it for some of the things I was describing with this grief, because I'm telling you, you know, it's like, it felt like the cruelest thing for me outside of the loss was to deny the loss. You know, for me, it would just be this sort of thing of, you know, my body knows it's irreparable. My body knows that this is a loss that is never going to be right in any kind of way. So, you know, it's sort of like that book, The Body Keeps the Score. No matter what my mind was telling me, like, maybe I should move on, maybe I should shove this down, maybe I should, you know, my body just had, all bodies have a way of surfacing that trauma to the surface. So I think it was Jung who said anything you sort of shove down into the basement of your soul has a way of crawling back up onto the front lawn eventually. And I found myself in this position with the grief doing that, you know, that the worst thing for me was to let this grief spin adrift, to not have it have meaning. And what made it possible to give it meaning was this idea of doing the Camino. My friend, JJ, when he had heard 2 years ago that I had done the Primitivo, he was so proud of me. And he was so overjoyed and encouraging. And the one thing he said, you know, he always has to, you know, one of the things that I loved about it, he always had to double down, you know, couldn't just do the Oviedo to Spain. He had to find the one that was double the length. He's like, well, I want to do the Portuguese Camino. I want to do the Portuguese Camino. It looks amazing. And I'm like, oh, JJ, you know, it's like, let's do it together. And it was just one of those things, you just sort of, you're talking nonsense on a phone call, you know, and
you think, if that'll happen, sure, why not? Yeah, let's do it.
Why not? You know, let's plan for it. And it was just one of those things that, you know, he sort of tucked away and I sort of tucked away. I didn't really know if he was serious or not. But when he died, you know, the first thing I thought of was maybe I should do that. I had no intention of doing another Camino. I had done the one that felt, you know, healing to me. Experience. That was my experience. And it was sort of one and done. I checked that box. But when he died, it sort of felt like this thing that needed to happen. And so I discussed it with his partner. I discussed it with his family, his mom and his sisters, who I believe are watching right now. And if they are, hi, everyone. I love you all. And we all had this collective idea of, you know, maybe you can carry JJ home. Maybe you can walk him to the church, you know, walk him home to God, so to speak, if one believes in those sorts of things. And, you know, and I'm not here in any sort of, you know, I have no specific religious leanings in any way, but I have a spiritual sort of center where it was like, yeah, I want to walk him home to peace. I want to walk him home to serenity, because his death was so sudden and tragic and knocked the wind out of all of us, frankly. And so with his family's blessing, that's what I did, you know, and I sort of gave a voice to that grief by walking that Camino. It sort of became JJ's voice. And what I had done was, in addition to carrying him, I had a photo. His mom had these beautiful photos of him. I actually have one right with me, that was made into a prayer card. and I enlarged it and I taped it to the back of my Osprey. and I would walk along, and so many pilgrims would come up to me and say, tell me about him. Tell me about this person that you're walking on the Camino. And I felt like JJ became his own celebrity on this Portuguese Camino from September to October. And every day I would run into the same pilgrims. I made so many beautiful friends along the way, and they'd be like, how are you doing? How's JJ doing? How are you all? And I felt like his memory was being healed, in a way that was allowing me to be healed. Every step I took was another step towards my own sort of completion. And I would send photographs and pictures to the family every evening, and trying to bring them along on this journey as well. And
is there anything more alive than being in people's thoughts and prayers every single day? You see the same
100%.
people multiple times a day on the Camino, and
oh my gosh,
every step of
100%.
the way they're asking, how are you guys going? That is living. That's really living.
It really is. That's such a great way to put it. And it really brought me back to this place of walking myself back to life, basically. Like I felt really rearranged and dead inside when he died. I was completely changed inside, as it should be. And I never will be the same again, nor would I want to be. But I wanted to learn how to not move on, but move along with his loss.
Yeah, you make it a part of you, and
that's right.
That's maybe one of the biggest kind of misconceptions of grief, is it's not moving on, it's moving with. You put it.
That's exactly it.
You put it in exactly the right way. It becomes a part of you, another string to your bow, so to speak, and you live with that, and you readjust around it. You make that space inside you for it, and who you are is as connected to that loss going forward as their life with you beforehand.
So, yeah, God, that's really a great way to put it, because, for me, a lot of it was, the more I was trying to deny what the loss meant to me, the more I was losing myself. I just felt like I had lost my connection to JJ. I was losing my connection to my friends around me because I had really gone inward and alone. I kind of pulled back from everyone just to heal in the way that I needed to heal, because I really understand, I was reading an article during the time I was grieving and training for the Camino. I gave myself 6 months to train because I really wanted to make sure I was healthy enough to complete it. And you all provide me with a great training plan. It's great. You can just print it off and follow it. And I followed it to the letter, and it allowed me to complete it in a way that was just so incredible. So,
I'm glad that you found that useful. I'll put that link up on screen for those watching.
Please do.
In case they want to see what you're referring to.
Yeah, I was surprised how many, for me, I'm not in the worst shape, but I'm not the most fit person either. And so I'm not someone that can just hit the trail running, I have to train. And so by following the guidelines that you put in, it wasn't too much too fast. And it kept me from having further injuries. I was already nursing a pretty bad injury. I had some pretty bad plantar fasciitis in my right heel. And by following your training plan, along with, physical therapy that I was doing, it really kept me from having a much more serious injury, during the entire thing. But, when I was training, I had read this article, and it was about grief as sort of as a disorder. And I guess it was the DSM had just come out, the sort of Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders had just come out with, how much is too much grieving. And it basically said that children that grieve more than 6 months and adults that grieve more than a year are considered a disorder. And it made me laugh, because it's like, grief is not something to be fixed. It's something to be experienced. And for those brave enough to hold your hand in the dark, to witness. And it can be very hard to watch that kind of pain. You want to sort of just shove it aside. You want your friend to feel better. So you want to say all these things that are actually counterintuitive to what the person might need. I needed to sink into the dark hole. I needed to sit there for a while, and I just needed people brave enough to hold my hand. And it sort of made me giggle because it was like, oh, so apparently on day 366, if I'm not over JJ, I'm now, a disordered griever, And one of the things about, doing something like the Camino was it didn't expect anything from me. All it asked me to do was walk a certain number of miles every day. And the Camino was going to take care of me. It was going to give me whatever it was I needed that day, whether it was feeling hardship and crying in the forest, because I missed my friend, whether it was feeling absolute joy that I could talk about him with a fellow pilgrim and not burst into tears. Each day that Camino gave me what it was that I needed. And I just felt that, it made a difference because it was a slow meeting of what my body was asking me to do, which was to heal my soul, if that makes sense, without getting too sort of, my friends laugh at me, I'm really woo woo, but it really,
there's nothing woo woo about that. I mean,
yeah,
if that's woo woo, then everybody who's ever done the Camino is a bit woo woo as well. Then
I think so.
It's exactly what it's for every day. And you use the phrase, "I got what I needed."
Yes,
and people say the Camino provides. If you're
the
looking
Camino provides. That's right.
If you're looking for solitude, people, for whatever reason, want the chance for introspection and self-reflection. You will see people on the Camino during the day, but they might not approach you.
Correct.
And if you're looking for connection and you want to meet with people and, completely take yourself out of your life and just, meet a complete stranger on totally neutral ground, you'll meet those people. If you want somebody to cry with because you're both going through a loss, you'll meet that person. The Camino, it's this unique blend of nature and extremely human feeling and connection, that is just it cannot be replicated anywhere else in the world.
Can't.
On any other trail. It's like nothing else.
There is nothing that has healed me more than these two walks. And I've done a lot of sort of outside work. I've done, work with spiritual mentors. I've done work with therapists, and I believe in all of them. And I think it's all important and has its place. But sort of the thing that sealed it all together, kind of the glue that moved through the cracks of that healing was, the two experiences that I had on the Camino. And to your point, you couldn't have said it perfectly. There were days where I felt more social and I would interact with pilgrims along the way. I'd stop in cafes and I'd see people I'd seen before, and we'd sit together and have coffees and how's your walk today? How are you doing? We'd all exchange phone. I still text them now. I've met the most beautiful people, and, we still text. I would texted them all and said, hey, I'm doing this interview. And they're like, great, we're going to watch. It's great. But there were times where it was like, hey, what are you doing tonight? Do you want to have dinner? And I'd feel like it. I'd be like, yeah, let's all meet for dinner. And then there were other days where I just wanted to sit alone with JJ and my journal and just kind of reflect on what was happening along the way. And to your point, everyone respected that. I remember there was this one day towards the end, and it was those last 5 days of just torrential downpour. And it was really affecting my psyche and everyone's. You could see it. Like we were all there. I remember there's this one girl, God bless her, from Australia, Victoria, and she was walking in honor of her grandmother who had just died. And she texted me and she's like, I've hunkered down in a church and I don't know if I can make it. And I just texted her back, I believe that you can, and I know what you're feeling, and I'm going to keep walking. I'm at this mile. And if you just want to know that, keep walking. And we got it. We got each other through that day. Okay, I'm at this mile. We didn't even see each other that day, but we just knew that the other one was walking in that horrible weather. And it really got us through. And I remember I had hit a church at one point and was crying over JJ. I had lit a candle for him and just having one of those moments of, I can't believe I'm walking my friend home like this. Like, I can't believe he's not physically with me. And this woman just very gently, she just knew exactly, like, I was not in a place where I felt like if anyone says anything to me, I'm probably going to pop off, but she just kind of knew what to, like you said, the Camino provides. She just gently put her hand on my shoulder and said, I see your backpack. I see your tears. I'm walking for my brother. And whoever that man is on the back of your backpack, He is so proud of you right now. And I just burst into tears. It was just such an emotional release of, you could not have said anything more perfect.
That's
You could
exactly what
not
we
have
want.
said the more perfect thing. And I felt that my friend was so proud of me. And I felt that he was constantly either laughing at me, like, Wendy, what the hell are you doing walking in the rain like this? Like, you don't have to prove your love for me like this. And in
Get
other
inside.
ways, he was just like, yeah, you keep marching, I'll get you through it. But, and I get it. I want to say I am in no way putting down anyone who sort of feels that the solution to handling one's grief is to just try to move on and get over it. We all handle our grief in unique and different ways. And, I respect everyone's process as much as I want my own process to be respected, but, I get it. This whole idea of, the DSM coming out with a timeline, I get it. Numbers are neat and they're tidy. Yeah. And I think grief is messy and unruly and nonlinear, but we want things to be neat and tidy. And, I would prefer
to try to process it in the same way, because you don't want grief hanging around all the time,
Correct.
You need a way to say to people, okay, enough is enough now.
Correct.
You need to put a new label on it if it's starting to go past what we all think is appropriate.
Correct. The one thing that made me angry about that article was, to me, it felt like, and this is just my interpretation, it felt like really what we're saying is your grief is making us uncomfortable. So in addition to dealing with your grief, we need you to also manage our feelings of discomfort around your grief. And for once in my life, I was unwilling to do that. And I wanted to kind of sink in as long as it took and give people permission to not have to sit in the discomfort of watching me do that if it was uncomfortable for them. But, I would prefer, to solve grief neatly if I could. I would prefer to solve it on a spreadsheet. I would prefer it to
the time and say after now, no more.
Yeah, to put it in metrics as opposed to the brutal work of walking through your life being on fire. I would prefer that. But what the Camino taught me was that no human being is solved by math. And what the Camino taught me was that my loss was mine and nobody else's. It taught me, that my loss is not something to get over, but to move on with, like we were discussing. And it taught me that I could take as much time as I needed. And that month walking with pilgrims who were also going through their own trauma, personally and collectively, really allowed me to do that. I just feel like every time I've allowed myself to sit with loss, not that I think there's a lesson to be learned from my friend dying or that it was, the universe's will. I don't believe any of that stuff at all. It's a tragedy. And I would trade all of this, by the way, for him to be here physically with me today. Everything I've learned, everything I've grown from, I would truly trade it all. But I do think that, the Camino was the only voice that said to me, take as long as you need with your grief. And it allowed me to tell JJ's story in a way that needed to be told, and the Camino became sort of the narrative structure in which I could tell that story. And I'm forever grateful.
Isn't it kind of unusual that it took perfect strangers to make that happen?
Sure.
All of the people in your life and in JJ's life who cared about him and about you so much, it still took somebody else who's never met you before and you may never see again in your life to say,
correct.
Whoever that man is, he'd be proud of you.
And it allowed me to walk back to my relationships, to be the Wendy that can laugh again, that can go out and have fun in Paris with everyone again, even if this isn't a topic that I can, necessarily discuss with everyone in my inner circle. I have constructed it in a way because of the Camino that has allowed me to show up again as me, show up again in those relationships, and not put that burden on anyone that might not be able to show up in that way. That these pilgrims did that for me, but also just the daily walking did that did that for me as well. And that was huge for me. It
So,
really, yeah,
just to cycle back on something, the
yeah.
Camino had no meaning or relevance to JJ before you went on it, and it was one-upmanship alone that was kind of the motivation for it.
I think so. I think so. Just knowing him, and people who know him who are watching will laugh because they're like, "Yeah, that sounds like JJ," you know. So, yeah, he was just a special person in my life, but very much supported these sort of spiritual endeavors that I would do, but always to your point, wanted to kind of one up me on them. Yeah.
And what had you known about the Camino before you went on your first one to the Primitivo?
It's funny. I'd never seen any of the movie. Like, I still to this day have not seen that movie, The Way, with Martin Sheen, and never seen it. Don't want to see it. I'm afraid it will ruin what my experience was on it at this point. So I haven't seen it. What I had done one time was I read this story about an American pilgrim who had walked from one side of the United States to the other. And she did that trusting that she would be provided for in each place. She walked only with a light backpack, the clothes on her back and everything. And she said that she had done it based on the Camino. And I was like, what's the Camino? And I just thought her story was so fascinating that she walked across the entire United States. And I looked up the Camino and I thought, oh, that's interesting. I'll put that on my bucket list. And, and years went by, but it was always kind of there. And then when COVID happened, I was forced to do a lot of sort of spiritual reevaluation about my own life and how I wanted to go forward coming out of lockdown and all of that. And it seemed like all the work that I had done during that time in therapy and with spiritual mentors was sort of begging for a kind of physical
outlet.
Yeah, just kind of like this symbolic physical representation of all that spiritual work that I had done. So that's when I started to seriously look at the Primitivo and thought, well, this would be a nice way to kind of cement that for myself. And it was very difficult, but I don't think it would have had the same kind of meaning had I not done all that work in almost the 2 years of lockdown that I had in and out of lockdown in Paris from 2020 to 2022. I don't think it would have had the impact that it had I not done that work. So I'm grateful that I did that, but that was why I had done it. And JJ knew that was why I was doing it. But I had never done anything like that before. I'd run a couple of marathons in LA and I had trained for those, but I'd never done anything of this kind of duration for that kind of period of time, and certainly never solo.
Okay, well, that's a very big jump into the unknown then. So you're not a habitual hiker or multi-day walker, nothing like that?
Not at all. Never did these long camping trips or these long hikes in the wilderness. The most I did was in Los Angeles. I would do a 30-minute hike in, Runyon. And anyone who's from LA was like, oh, Runyon, It's like, all of us in our yoga attire, and our smoothies from Earth Cafe, and our cars are like 2 miles away, safely parked, It's nothing.
You still see people's houses over the brow of the hill.
1,000%. There's civilization everywhere. It is so I had never been out in the middle of nowhere by myself, and I remember too, when the book Wild came out, Cheryl Strayed wrote that book about the through hiking that she did in the PCT. Even reading that, I felt, well, I'm not interested in that. I would never want to camp overnight and deal with, animals or, a compass on my own. Like, I feel like the Camino was the perfect amount of solo wilderness hiking with the infrastructure that Follow the Camino gave me if there was a problem. If there was an emergency, I could call the emergency number. At the end of the day, I had a place to stay with a roof over my head. The accommodations were great, I had my own bathroom, I had my own bed, and just knowing that gave me enough feeling of safety. I'm not that much of a risk taker. This felt like more of a I don't know, like more of a stable risk, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
And I was scared a couple of times, on this particular one, especially the part from Lisbon to Porto, there were some really barren areas where I didn't see pilgrims for days.
Yeah, it is. The Camino Portuguese is fairly well developed from Porto up, but
That's right.
Lisbon to Porto, kind of just more or less, it's too much of a time commitment for a lot of people to take. It's a month
Correct.
of hiking, and
Correct.
a lot of people find that time, or can make that time in their lives to do all of that in one section. But some truly beautiful parts of kind of inland Portugal that people rarely get to see. It's not a well touristed part of the country,
No,
even. So you must have
no,
seen some pretty impressive sights, some really, really authentic. You had a very authentically Portuguese experience.
I really did. I really did. And I will say the part from Porto to Santiago was very populated with pilgrims, and it felt good. Like that second, there were two, it felt like it was two different Caminos from Lisbon to Porto. And that was also when the fires were happening. You know, I cannot describe how incredible the Portuguese hospitality was. I mean, their villages were literally on fire, and they were concerned about keeping us safe too. And that just meant the world to me, that, you know, you could see the smoke overhead and the air quality was just, you know, terrible. And we were sort of sucked into these accommodations, and they would constantly be checking on, you know, are you okay? Do you have everything you need? You know, have you talked, you know, is it safe for you to walk? And I'd say, they told me not to walk. Okay, we're going to take care of you, you know. And I was just so blown away by the hospitality, especially when they were going through their own trauma. You know, there I was with my personal trauma, and they were dealing with their personal trauma. And it was sort of this thing, this symbiotic kind of
You find things to give each
connection.
other, that helps.
It does. Yeah. And I think it was important for that first part, as much as I really felt uncomfortable in certain parts of it. And it wasn't because of anything that, you know, was done by the infrastructure of Follow the Camino. It's just the path is the path, right? There were so many parts of it where I'm like, wow, I am really by myself. But it felt equally important that I was really by myself.
But you
It
had
felt
that
like
time.
I had that moment with JJ, and I had that moment with just my own thoughts, you know, and no distraction from whatever it was that was going on in my brain that needed healing. And the physical walking was kind of again, that metaphor for healing. The fires were a metaphor for how I felt on the inside with all that grief. Like I said, I kept describing it as my world felt like it was on fire. Of course, it made sense that, you know,
That there were villages
the
burning.
physical manifestation would be burnt, not to make it about me, but I think when any pilgrim walks it, you're dealing with, everyone's bringing their collective trauma, and then they're bringing their own individual trauma that's asking to be healed. And I think sometimes it can sort of manifest for us collectively and individually. And then the second part, where it was just torrential rains, you know, my friend was such a force of nature in my life. And our relationship, as wonderful as it was sometimes fraught with, you know, he was a tornado in my life sometimes, you know, and I thought to myself as I was walking that last way, just in torrential downpour, and I sent my friends a video, like it was biblical, the rain, and you could hear me just cursing in the 30 seconds of the video. And they wrote back, you're not really selling this to us if you're trying to get us to walk it. But at the same time, it was inspiring, you know, because it's like, wow, rain or fire, she's walking through it, you know.
Yeah.
But I thought, of course, I'm not going to walk my friend home to the church in Santiago on ponies and rainbows. Of course, I was going to walk him through a biblical rainstorm that felt like a hurricane, because it represented what I felt on the inside when he had died, you know, and what I felt sometimes that our relationship was, as wonderful as it was. You know, I don't want to paint this now, you know, perfect picture of, you know, we're all complicated human beings, and he was no exception, and our relationship was no exception. But I think that's what made it so beautiful, is that despite the complications, we found a way to hang in there with each other. We always found our way back to one another. And I think his death really broke my heart in that way, because it was going to be the last time that we would find our way together. So walking him home was so meaningful to me, because it just meant that, you know, he was going to be there through all that kind of that insane weather just seemed to be symbolic of what it was I was doing, if that makes sense.
It tells the story. I mean, if your relationship, and like you said, everyone's relationship is fire and rain. It's you go through these ups and downs, and you go through it together, and it makes perfect sense that your last act of going through it together was in the same way as every other act.
Exactly. The fire that represented the anger that I felt about his loss, and then the rain that represented just the grief and the crying that I felt over his loss as well. All of that was kind of represented in this particular Camino, and I couldn't have been more grateful for it, even if in the moment I was like, oh my God, what am I doing? And why am I doing it? I couldn't be more grateful that I did it.
And you never considered changing your travel plans or
not once.
diverting back to Lisbon for a week and waiting it out or something?
Not one time. And I'm so grateful that, well, let me back up. That's not true. Actually, that is not true.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. Every second I wanted to quit. Every second I wanted to get in a taxi. Every second I wanted to be done, but it never really led to me physically taking any action on that. And I think I do have to thank Follow the Camino for that, because I knew I had an accommodation waiting for me. I knew that if there was a real serious problem, I would have gotten a phone call from Jade saying, hey, we're actually hearing it's not just rainstorms, it's potential hurricane tornado. We need you to get off,
And if you can't go.
Right. And if I wasn't getting that phone call from her, then it meant to me, this is doable. It may be uncomfortable, but my grief was uncomfortable. It may be physically unfortunate for the next 6 hours, but it's good to feel that discomfort, to sort of get comfortable with being uncomfortable, because that's kind of a metaphor for dealing with life, that I can't just enjoy the days where the sun was shining on the Camino. I had to take the Camino in every instance that it was giving to me,
So right.
And that made it, I don't think I would have forgiven myself. And I'm not faulting anyone who got in a taxi on those days or who decided to take that week in Lisbon. I think everyone's Camino is their own, and it is unique, and it is, protected from judgment by anyone else, and I'm very...
For some people, as meaningful as the Camino is, for some people, it is just a walking holiday. It's a lovely walking holiday through a historic part of a beautiful country. And it's more than that. And if people want to be a little bit more comfortable, don't want to take the added risk, they don't. And that's
exactly.
fine too.
Exactly. And I think what was so great is you all made that possible. I saw other people who were using Follow the Camino, and they did take extra time. They did not want to be, to your point, they were doing a walking holiday, and that's their right. They're not going to want the same experience of walking with wet socks and a poncho and your friend on your back, while dealing with all that kind of, inclement weather. They're going to want to stay in a place that's warm and good until they can continue their walking holiday. And so be it, But for someone like me, it wasn't a one size fits all with you guys. It's always, well, Wendy needs this experience and this particular client needs this experience, and we're going to meet both where they are. And I found that really helpful. And one of the other things I just thought was so wonderful, that day that I arrived at the church, I was crying, I had my photo taken, and I'm soaking wet with my certificate that proved that I had walked the entire thing, and I get to the hotel that was arranged for me, and Jade had left me this beautiful handwritten note. It was just this note with this little gift saying, congratulations, you made it. I know this was an arduous journey. I know you did this for your friend. And it was just such a lovely thing to get at the end of, 400 miles of just, fire and rain, to see like, wow, what a nice touch, that I wasn't just a number, that I was, a unique client whose journey she had been invested in, that really meant a lot to me.
I am really glad that you saw the effort put in there, and that's what our clients mean to us. Without going too business speaky, the Camino is a special place for a reason. We recognize that with people. So anything that we can do to make the journey more comfortable and more meaningful, and to make the destination, i.e. arriving in Santiago, and to add to that feeling of complete elation and achievement, because it is an achievement getting there. Anything that
Yes.
we can do to really acknowledge that, we try our best to. Can you briefly talk to me about that feeling of walking into the square, seeing the cathedral? You've crossed half of Portugal to get there. It must be you must never have experienced anything like that.
Nothing like it. It really surpassed the first time I did it. The first time I did it was its own unique thing for sure, but the weather was beautiful the day that I walked in the first time. This time, I remember the last mile. I had just had it. And what I did was I took off my backpack. I'm walking my friend to the church, but I got rid of a lot of other stuff. I left my walking poles on the side of the road for someone. I left my wet, soggy shoes on the side of the road for someone. And I had my Crocs connected to the bag. I put on the Crocs just for the last mile. And I was so angry that I had the poncho and I marched. My umbrella had broken off because the winds were so torrential. And I'm marching into the square, and you see all these similar pilgrims, just our hair is soaked, we're soaked to the core, but no one's sad, no one's upset, everyone's just filled with joy and taking photographs of one another. And I held my friend's photo up in the middle in front of the church, and a bunch of people had taken my photograph, and I was able to send that to JJ's family. And I was able to send that to his partner. And I was able to send a video to my friends like, hey, I made it. My hair was soaking. I showed them my Crocs. I didn't care. It was just the most beautiful thing. And then to wait in line at the office. And I cried. I cried when they wrote down, you did it from Lisbon to Santiago. And I explained to the woman at the counter what I was doing it for. And she got emotional, and to hold my little certificate up and have her take a photo. It took all the pain away. All of a sudden, the 6 hours of walking, through that kind of torrential rainstorm just disappeared because the meaning surpassed. Yeah, exactly. And I swore when I was doing this Camino, never again. And yet here I am sitting here and I'm like, well,
I've heard there's a really lovely route in,
And, one of my best friends, if she's watching, her two daughters are 12 and 14, and they are the most important little girls. And they're not little girls; they're young women now. Young women in the world to me. But I've known them since they were born, and their graduation gifts are going to be the last 100 kilometers of the Camino.
There you go. You say that you're out, and then they pull you back in again.
I'm not out. I'm like, 100 kilometers. It's not so bad. It's just, whatever. But hopefully the weather won't be as horrible as what it was for them. But we'll see when the time goes. But they seem into it. They seem like they're into it. So.
Well, not long to wait now. And surely the most appropriate training for that is to walk across the United States in the meantime.
Exactly. Just get them to start training, walk from their home in Georgia to, the next state over just for practice.
Why not?
Yeah.
Wendy, before we go, I just wanted to ask one last question of you.
Sure.
Do you have any advice for people going on the Camino? So regardless of their motive, regardless of what route they're doing, hopefully, like you said, they don't get the same biblical weather that you had.
Yes.
But if there's one piece of advice you could offer to people, it could be on anything from training beforehand to what to pack to how to mentally prepare for it to your favorite cup of coffee you had, whatever it might be. What's the one tip you're leaving for people?
The thing that I would recommend, this is my advice, and I know it's going to sound a little counterintuitive, and I'm not here to take away anyone's experience who does it in a group or who does it together, but my advice would be to do it solo. Mm-hmm. And the reason that my advice would be to do it solo is it does something for you in a way that doing it with a group, at least, look, my experience is walking in solitude allows you to reconnect to yourself, and it allows you to build a relationship with yourself that can't be done in another way. And yet I wasn't willing to do that solely on my own. So being able to have a structure like Follow the Camino, it allowed me to walk solo, but to walk with some infrastructure in place so that if there was a problem, I could reach out to someone. I didn't have to worry about planning all the accommodations on my own. I didn't have to plan, what to do if there's a fire and I don't I don't have a connection to the Portuguese embassy. I'm not a person who has any social media, so I couldn't just go on and go into any of the Camino forums and see what was happening. I had to rely on you guys, and so it gave me the ability to walk solo. That would be my recommendation, to give yourself the experience of walking yourself back to you. I found that to be very, very helpful. But yeah, also train. Please train. give yourself train. Like don't just think you can walk it, because that'll knock you down to your knees. Train.
The blisters
it's hard even with the training.
The training plan.
Yeah, it's hard with the training. So you want to give yourself the best shot.
Wendy, I can't begin to thank you for your time today,
Of course.
and for sharing your story with us, and for being so vulnerable. I'm incredibly glad and grateful that you took what you did from your experience on the Camino, and that you felt that it really honored JJ's memory, and he now has a legacy on the Camino.
Yes.
And he's touched the lives of many, many people. So he's alive with us, and he's alive in when we talk about him. So
thank you so much.
Thank you
that
so
means
much
a lot
for your time today. And all of the best with everything. We hope to see you again soon. You said it was your last one, but
I doubt it.
Yeah, we'll keep sending the newsletters to you.
Yeah,
we'll see what happens.
Jade will be hearing from me, I'm sure.
Brilliant.
Thank you for giving me the space to talk about this.
And thank you everybody who's watched. We hope you all enjoyed today, and we will catch you for another one again in the future. Okay.
Thank you.
Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.
Buen Camino.
Bye.